Okay, so for decades,
imagine this,
right,
a book,
the U.S.
right, a
government
15th
line
century
was
manual,
basically
but one so
supernatural
notorious,
stuff,
so
psychic
completely
powers,
game-changing that
telepathy,
its pages
seeing
are still
things
casting
far
these
away with
long
your
shadows
mind,
across history.
pure fantasy.
And
That's
get
what they
this,
told
it wasn't
everyone.
Yeah,
some
that was the
decree
public
from a
phase.
king,
Complete
or
skepticism.
battle plan. No, this
But,
thing was written by
while that
clerics,
was the official
churchmen,
story,
but
behind
men
closed
who, it
doors,
seems,
something,
were maybe more focused on
something
fear
much
than,
stranger was
faith,
apparently
and what
going
it did,
on.
it essentially
Deep
turned
inside
whispers
the
to just
intelligence community.
accusations to
It's a
death
really
sentences.
interesting contrast,
Suspicion
isn't it?
literally fueled
Publicly,
the
it's all
fire. That
scientific
book,
dismissal.
the Malleus
Privately, the
Maleficarum.
Pentagon, the CIA.
Now, on
they're
the
clearly
surface,
wrestling
it
with
was
something
sold
very
as a
different.
definitive
These
guide to hunting
fantasies
witches
suddenly
in Europe.
become
That's really just the
a
starting
serious
point for our
strategic
deep dive
issue.
today.
Exactly.
The real question
And
we're
that
getting into
worry,
is,
that
was
sort
the
of
Malleus
creeping fear
actually
about
about
psychic
witches,
warfare,
or was
it
it
leads to one of
fundamentally
the
a
honestly
tool,
most
an
bizarre
instrument
and
of
top
control?
secret projects
Our
of the
sources
whole
point to
Cold
two
War.
really
Project
compelling
Sunstream.
ideas. One camp argues
Let me just
it's
picture
basically
it.
a weapon,
An actual government
used by the
project
church
trying to
crush hidden
weaponize the
knowledge
human
and
mind,
old
funded off
traditions,
the
maybe
books.
Gnostic
Totally
wisdom,
secret.
pagan
And
stuff,
officially,
really
the cover
science on
story,
the
or
other
maybe
side,
the initial idea, was
suggesting something maybe
remote
more
viewing.
hidden, more sinister.
Right.
Whispers
This
about its real origins
supposed
involving, like,
ability
secret
for
societies,
trained people
powerful
to
occult
just
groups, or even,
perceive
non-human
distant
influences.
places.
And that's what's so
Secret enemy
fascinating,
bases,
isn't
maybe
it?
even
How
peek into
these
the future.
alternative
Alternative
using
views
their
force us
minds.
to look
And
beyond
we should be
just
clear,
the
this
standard
wasn't
story.
some
We're not
like
just asking
side
what happened,
hobby. It wasn't just
but
a
really
few
trying to
folks messing
understand
around.
why it was so
This was a
important back then,
strategic
and maybe
move,
more
a
critically,
direct response to
why
what
we
they
still
thought the Soviets
feel
were
its
doing.
ripples
They were
today.
urgently trying to get
So our
an
mission
edge
here
a
in this deep
completely
dive
new kind
is to
of,
kind of step into that murky
battlefield.
area,
And that's what we're doing
to
today.
the
We're gonna
conspiracy
peel
theories
back
meet.
those layers
We
of
want to trace the
secrecy,
shadows of this
really
incredibly dark
deep
book
dive into
and the
Project
darkness
Sunstreak,
while it still projects.
and
We'll
the
walk
kind
you
of
through the
wild
facts, the history
conspiracy
we
theories
know,
that are still
and then
swirling
really
around.
unpack
because
some
the
of the most
story goes
intriguing,
way beyond
sometimes
just
frankly
psychic
chilling
spying.
theories
Oh,
around it.
absolutely.
They might have
so
cracked
let's
open the
ground
door
ourselves
to,
first.
well, alien
known
contact,
facts.
maybe even
The Malleus
some sources suggest
Maleficarum, the Hammer of
interdimensional
Witches,
conflict.
It gets pretty
translates
out there.
literally,
It really does.
published
So we're going to look at where it
1486,
came from, the
mostly
really
the work of a
unsettling
German
things the viewers
clergyman,
reported
Heinrich Kramer.
seeing, the
Jacob Springer is
weird
also
overlaps
listed
with
maybe
old
as a
occult
co-author,
stuff,
maybe just a key
and these
endorser.
incredible
The details are
claims
a bit
about
fuzzy there.
contacting, right, and
Well,
despite
the unknown.
being, well,
So yeah,
controversial
settlement,
even
this
in its
is where
own
things
time,
get weird.
This
So
book
where did
just
Sunstreak even
skyrockets.
come from?
It becomes the authority
really
on
kicks
witch
off
hunting
back
across
in the early
Europe.
70s.
It
There was
lays
this
out,
sort of,
what witches
quiet
supposedly
panic
are,
brewing,
their alleged
in the
deals with the
intelligence
devil,
world during the Cold
and,
War.
Right.
most
Word got out
disturbingly,
that the
gives
Soviets
detailed
were
instructions
pouring
on how to
serious
find them,
money and effort
prosecute
into
them, punish them.
parapsychology.
Right,
And
and
not
this
just
is where
dabbling.
things start
We're
to get
talking
really interesting,
state-sponsored
peeling back the
experiments,
layers. Kramer,
telepathy,
the main author,
moving
he wasn't
objects
some
with the mind,
universally respected
psychokinesis,
theologian.
and crucially,
Not at all. In
remote
fact,
viewing.
a lot
Yeah,
of
and when
important
U.S.
church figures
intelligence
at the
picked
time
up on
openly
this,
dismissed his work.
alarms went off.
The University of
Big
Cologne,
time.
a
The
major
Pentagon,
theological
especially.
center,
You can imagine the
actually
fear, right?
condemned
What if this
the
stuff
book
is real?
Well,
Even if it
outright.
only gives a
Exactly.
small advantage.
Which leads to
Exactly.
this
The
huge
U.S.
mystery,
could be
doesn't it?
completely
How does a
blindsided in
book
a
by a
conflict
friar,
that doesn't
a book
use
officially
bombs or
slammed by
spies in
major
the
religious
traditional
authorities,
sense.
so
Suddenly
this
explode across Europe,
this
I mean,
potential
with this
psychic
almost
gap
supernatural
that leads
speed,
directly to the
becoming the
CIA
absolute
starting Project
foundation for, like,
Stargate, one of
which
the
was
most
kind of the umbrella
violent and
program. And under
widespread
Stargate, you
persecutions
get
in
these
history.
sub-projects.
How does that happen?
Project
that
Sunstreak
official
was one of
history
them,
just-
run by the Defense
doesn't
Intelligence
quite add up,
Agency,
does
the
it? There's a gap
DIA,
there.
mostly
Precisely.
through the 1980s.
And that's the
Okay.
gap these
So
other theories
Sunstreak
try to fill.
gets going.
It makes you ask, and how
on
does a fringe
paper,
idea, especially
its
one
job
pushed back against
sounds,
by the establishment,
well, almost
gain that much
straightforward
traction
for that
that
world.
fast?
Recruit
So
people,
some sources
train
suggest,
them as
maybe
remote
Kramer had
viewers.
secret backing.
Get them to
Serious
project their
backing.
consciousness,
Not just a few
basically,
friendly
and
priests.
spy
No,
on
no.
Soviet facilities.
We're talking
gather
potentially
intel.
powerful
Standard espionage,
hidden
just
groups.
with a very
There are
unconventional
whispers, for
method.
instance, but that's not how it played out, was it? It became clear pretty fast this wasn't just
you know,
about
the ones
finding
supposedly
missile
protecting
silos.
No,
No,
almost right
secrets
away,
after
the
main
viewers
order
weren't
was
just
crushed.
describing,
Interesting.
submarine
Or other
pens
sources
radar
point towards
installations. The data
specific
start
occult
getting
cabals,
weird.
groups maybe
Weird
interested
how.
in stirring
Well,
up
that was
chaos,
the big turning
who
point,
saw the
really.
Malleus
The
as a
viewers
perfect
started
tool to
reporting
spread
things
mass
that,
hysteria.
based on our normal
Yeah, so the
understanding
Malleus
of physics
wasn't
and
just
reality,
some, like,
shouldn't
bad
exist.
theology
Things that
gone
shouldn't exist.
wild.
Okay,
According
now
to
we're
this
getting
view,
somewhere.
no.
Yeah,
It was
the
potentially a
information they were
deliberate
bringing back
psychological
was
weapon,
pushing
crafted
way
perhaps
past the
to
boundaries of
plunge
what
Europe
anyone
into
expected.
paranoia.
It
How would that even
fundamentally single-handedly challenge
Well,
what
think
the
about
program was
Kramer's
even
detailed
supposed to be doing.
instructions.
So tell me
How
about
to
these
find
viewers.
witch marks.
They weren't just
How
random
to use
people
sleep
off the street,
deprivation
right?
for confession.
Yeah.
Many had military
Our
backgrounds.
sources
That's
say
right,
these became
often
a
military
terrifyingly
personnel.
effective
And they
blueprint.
went through this really
They turned
specific,
neighbors into spies,
structured training,
eroded trust within communities,
controlled protocols.
basically
was the
creating
term,
this
like coordinate
self-feeding
remote
cycle of
viewing
fear.
or CRV.
Okay, let's
CRV,
shift focus
okay.
a bit.
So it wasn't just
This idea
like
that
closing your
witchcraft
eyes and
itself
hoping
was
for the
maybe
best.
just
No, very
a
systematic.
cover story. They might be given just
The
a set of
Malleus
geographic
clearly
coordinates
defined
or maybe a
witchcraft as
random
heresy,
number
right?
linked
A
to a
pact with the
target.
devil.
Then
And
they'd
it
go
pointed
through
the
these
finger
stages,
overwhelmingly at
drilling
women.
down,
Yes,
describing
overwhelmingly.
sensory
But
details,
the conspiracy theory
sketching
argues this
impressions,
definition was just
trying to build a
misdirection,
picture
a
of
cover
target
for something
they knew
maybe
nothing
even
about
worse,
consciously.
what some call an
Often
intellectual
something hidden
genocide.
miles away,
Explain
maybe
that. What
even
does that
sealed
mean,
in an
intellectual
envelope.
genocide?
Right
Well,
there in the
consider
room.
who is
And did it
actually
work?
targeted most often.
Initially.
The
Well,
women
the early
labeled
results
witches.
were
They were frequently
apparently
midwives, herbalists,
intriguing.
keepers of folk
Impressive,
wisdom,
maybe,
you know.
Right,
but
the
small
local
scale.
healers. The ones with traditional
sketches
knowledge.
that looked
Exactly, and
surprisingly
they're
like a Soviet
supposed
factory.
crime. It wasn't
Details
really
about a
sorcery in the
hidden
fantasy
bunker
sense.
that
It
later
was
matched
ancient
spy
knowledge,
photos.
practical knowledge.
Enough to keep the
Things
funding
like healing
flowing,
with plants,
definitely.
guiding
so it had some
childbirth,
legs.
Yeah.
maybe even
But then, like you
understanding the
said,
stars'
things took a
natural
turn.
cycles.
A sharp turn, yeah. Because
Knowledge
it's one
passed
thing to
down,
sketch a building you
often
shouldn't know
outside the
about. It's
official
something else
church
entirely
structures.
when you're
Yeah,
trained military
wisdom that
viewers
maybe
start
came
reporting
from
experiences that just
Christian roots,
flat out defy the
Druidic
material
traditions,
world as we
pagan
know it.
practices, maybe even
what kind of
echoes
things?
from Egypt or
Well,
Babylon.
get
But
this.
the
Some
Malleus
viewers started reporting
demonize them,
energy
accused midwives
beings.
of
Energy
sacrificing
Yeah.
babies to
Not
Satan,
people, not
herbalists
animals,
of
just
using devil
conscious
magic for
energy
their
forms that
cures.
were
It's
apparently
brutal
watching
stuff.
them while they
And
were
this
doing
leads
the
to a
remote
really
viewing.
watching the
point,
viewers.
some
Okay,
sources
that's
make.
great.
Right.
This
Others
wasn't
claimed
random.
they weren't
It
just
was
moving across
potentially
space,
a calculated
but across
campaign
time,
to wipe out that
getting glimpses
ancient
of
knowledge.
ancient
An
history
intellectual
or even
purge,
future
as
events.
you said.
Mm.
Imagine
Time
that
travel.
wisdom, the Druidic understanding of nature, the
There's
holistic
one really
healing had been allowed to
famous or
thrive,
infamous
to integrate.
account. Yeah.
History could
A
look
viewer
very different, couldn't
insisted they
it?
saw
Maybe
the
different
Egyptian
medical
pyramids
paths, different
being built,
scientific
but
understandings.
not by Egyptians.
By targeting and eliminating the people who held that
tall,
knowledge, primarily
luminous
women,
entities.
the argument
Luminous
goes,
entities
the church
building the
and the
pyramids.
ruling
Yeah.
elites
Sounds like
solidified
something
their
from
own
a,
power
French
structure. Their
documentary.
narrative
Exactly,
became the
except
only
these were
So in that
reports coming
light,
from
every
within a
execution,
classified
every
military
burning stake,
intelligence
exactly.
program.
Wasn't
That's
just
what
killing
makes you
a
stop
person.
and think.
Some sources argue
definitely.
it
Any
was
other
like a
examples?
torch,
Oh yeah, another
deliberately
one, just as
extinguishing
strange.
a whole
A
line
viewer
of wisdom,
claimed they found hidden
knowledge
spacecraft
that might have
under the
fundamentally
ice in
changed our
Antarctica.
civilization. Hidden
That really does
spacecraft,
reframe it,
like
doesn't it?
UFOs.
Thinking about
Seems to
suppressing
be the
knowledge,
implication.
targeting
And
the keepers
guarded,
of it as a
apparently,
long-term
by some
strategy
kind
for
of
power.
consciousness that
Which brings us
resisted
back to
intrusion,
another
like
nagging
a psychic
question
guard
our
dog,
sources
but
raise.
not a dog.
Okay,
Who
wow. So
actually
these reports,
pushed
were
this
they just
book
ignored,
so hard?
filed away as
Who
crazy?
made sure
Well,
it
officially, a
survived?
lot of the stuff was
I mean, the
probably
Malleus
downplayed
became
or
incredibly
buried,
widespread.
classified deep,
second only to
but
the Bible
inside
in
the
some places,
project,
apparently.
the
That kind of
whispers
printing
started.
and distribution
The
wasn't
idea
cheap
took hold
back
that
then.
maybe
Not at all.
remote
A
viewing wasn't
major
just about
undertaking.
spying
So
on the
who paid
Soviets
for all those
anymore.
copies?
Maybe.
And maybe more
Maybe it was
crucially,
about
who kept
making
promoting
contact.
it,
And this is where it gets
ensuring
even
it's dead
stranger, right?
influential.
The connection,
even
or
when
the apparent
respected
connection
theologians were
to
condemning it early
occult
on.
practices.
This is where those
Yes,
theories
that's
about an
another
invisible
layer to
hand
this whole
really
thing
come
that's
into
just
focus.
fascinating.
Okay.
Some
People
researchers
within
looking
the
through
program
archives and obscure
apparently
texts
started noticing
suggest
these
it was deliberately
disturbing
pushed by
parallels between
let's call
the
them
remote
shadowy
viewing
groups
techniques
within
they
the
were
church
developing
itself.
and
Like
refining,
internal faction.
and
Kind of
practices found
proto-Illuminati
in
groups,
really
maybe.
old
Long
occult
before the actual
traditions.
Illuminati.
Occult traditions,
Groups,
like
like
our sources argue, who
methods
wanted to weaponize
described in
fear.
esoteric
They
orders.
saw the Malleus
Groups
as a
like the
tool
Hermetic
to
Order of the
justify more
Golden Dawn
surveillance,
or the
expand the
Rosicrucians.
Inquisition's power,
They were looking
and
at
basically
rituals for
consolidate
astral
institutional
projection,
control.
achieving trance
A power
states,
grab
intense
disguised as a holy
visualization
war.
exercises, the
deeply
whole idea
cynical,
of
if
separating
true.
your
And then some theories
consciousness
go
from
even
your
further,
physical body.
stepping outside
Wait, so the technique
purely human
Sunstreak was
motives.
teaching its military viewers.
Certain
seem to directly
occult
mirror
perspectives
these
highlighted in our
ancient
sources
mystical
talk about
practices.
a
It's
potential
quite
dark
striking when you put them side
inspiration
by side.
behind
So the
the
question
Malleus.
becomes,
The idea
was the
isn't just
Pentagon,
Kramer's
was
own
the
fanaticism,
DIA
but maybe some kind of
stumbling onto,
external
or maybe
influence,
rediscovering
a channel
some kind of ancient
almost.
You mean
technique,
like possession
something mystics
or something
and secret
influencing?
societies had
In
been
this
using
view,
for
yeah, the
centuries.
Malleus might have
That's
been
the
partly
implication,
dictated,
yeah.
you could
Was
say,
this
by an
military
unseen
intelligence
hand.
program
Something
actually an unwitting
not
or maybe
entirely
witting
human.
occult
Okay, that's a chilling
experiment?
thought.
That's a
If that were the
pretty
case,
mind-bending
who or
thought.
what really
And it didn't
benefited
stop
from all
there,
the
did it?
fear and
The
bloodshed that
experiences
followed?
got
Exactly.
darker. It
They
raises
did.
profound
Some
questions
viewers
about
started
hidden
reporting
forces potentially
encounters with
manipulating
actively
history for
hostile
centuries.
presences.
Whether human
How?
or
They
something else.
describe,
Wow.
entering a
Okay,
location
but let's pivot to
mentally,
something
projecting their
almost
consciousness there, only to be
paradoxical about the
confronted,
Malleus
not by
itself.
human guards,
The book
but
was
by
obviously
what they
designed to
described as
condemn witchcraft,
shadowy
right?
entities,
Stamp it out.
things
Absolutely,
that seemed
that was its
fully
stated
aware of
purpose.
their
Yet,
psychic intrusion
ironically,
and
it
actively
ended
tried to
up
block
preserving
them or push them
incredibly
out.
Aware of
detailed
them.
descriptions
Yeah.
of
Like
spells,
psychic guards.
rituals,
Essentially,
pagan
yes, which
all
raises
within
a
its own
really
pages.
profound
Kramer,
and, frankly,
in his obsession
unsettling
to
possibility.
expose
Which
and
is,
damn these
Well, if the
practices,
human mind can actually
basically
travel
created a
outside the
meticulous
body,
record of them.
maybe
bizarre
maybe
when you
those
think about it.
non-physical
It creates
realms
this
aren't empty.
strange
Maybe other
duality in the
intelligences already
text.
live there.
And maybe
And
they
some
don't
historians
appreciate
and
visitors.
theorists, particularly
Exactly.
those looking at
Entities
it
that
from,
really
say,
didn't
a
want
Masonic
people like
or
the
Hermetic
Sunstreak viewers
angle,
poking
have
around.
picked
It
up
makes
on
you
this.
wonder,
They suggest that certain
was
secret
Sunstreak
societies,
opening
groups
doors
like
that
the
had been
Rosicrucians,
deliberately
were
shut
into
for a very
mystical
very long
knowledge,
time, for a good reason.
hermeticists
Okay, so
studying
if they were
ancient
opening
wisdom,
doors,
and even later Freemasons,
what exactly
might
did
have
they
used
find on the
Malleus
other
very
side?
differently.
How so?
Because some
Not
of the
as a
witch hunting
sensational
manual, but
claims
almost as
are
a
about,
catalog.
well,
An
aliens.
accidental archive of occult
Extraterrestrials.
traditions they wanted to
Absolutely. This is
preserve
where
or
the
study,
story really goes
even
into
if
high
distorted
gear.
through Kramer's
We actually
So it's
have
like a two-way mirror?
declassified documents,
great way to put it.
fragments,
One
hints
side
really that
reflects terror,
suggest some remote
destruction,
viewing
suffering.
sessions were specifically
But
targeting
the other
Mars.
side,
Mars.
maybe, like
holds
the
these
planet
coded
Mars.
fragments
planet
of the
Mars.
very knowledge it was
There's
trying
one
to destroy.
particularly
Which
famous
leads to the
session often
question,
cited where a viewer gave
Was
this
the Malleus
incredibly
purely a
detailed
hammer for
description.
smashing
They
things?
claimed they
Or
were
was
observing
it,
Mars
in a weird,
millions
twisted
of
way,
years ago.
also a kind of key?
Millions.
A
And they described
grimoire
seeing
hiding
these
in plain
tall
sight.
beings
It's a
sheltering
fascinating
inside
possibility, isn't
massive
it?
pyramidal
Information
structures.
hidden right there,
Pyramids on
protected
Mars
by the
as their
thing trying to
planet
kill
was
it.
dying
You know,
around them.
sources point
A
to examples
civilization
where
facing extinction.
descriptions
Wow,
of herbal
okay.
remedies called
That's quite a claim.
witchcraft
It
might have
is,
been
and
read
it wasn't
by
just
others
Mars.
as, well,
Other sessions
actual
allegedly
herbalism,
targeted
or
well-known
accounts of
UFO
Sabbath
hotspots
seen
and
as
crash
corrupted
sites on
versions
Earth,
of older
including
pagan rites
Roswell.
worth
Roswell
understanding.
had to be in there.
We definitely can't talk
And
about the
viewers
Malleus
reportedly
without
described
hitting
seeing
hard on its
non-human
intense
bodies,
focus on
alien
women.
artifacts,
It's
all
almost
hidden
singular.
away
Some
deep
sources
inside
basically call it a
classified
feminine
government
war.
facilities.
The text is
So not just
dripping with
seeing things
misogyny.
far away,
Kramer
but
explicitly
seeing
states
things
women
the
are
government
weaker,
was
more
actively
carnal,
hiding.
more likely to
That's the
fall into league
claim.
with the
It
devil.
suggests the
It's
viewers weren't
relentless.
just
But
passive
why?
observers.
Why that
They were
extreme focus? Was
potentially
it just
uncovering
Kramer's
evidence
personal
of an
hang-ups?
alien presence.
The
that was
conspiracy
being
angle argues,
actively
no, this wasn't
concealed.
random.
And then there's
it was
Wright Patterson
strategic.
Air Force
Strategic
Base,
hat.
right?
Think back to who
Always
held
comes
that
up in these
traditional
stories.
knowledge. We talked
Wright
about
Patterson.
the healing, the
Another
folk
chilling
wisdom,
account
the oral
involved a
traditions.
viewer who
It was
claimed
largely
they
women.
psychically
Right, the
entered
midwives, the
hidden
herbalists.
chambers
Exactly.
deep underground
So
there.
by targeting
see?
women
Containers,
specifically as witches,
holding
the Malleus
biological
effectively targeted
specimens
those
that were
alternative
completely
systems of
unlike
knowledge and
anything
power.
known on Earth.
It helped
Alien
ensure
bodies,
patriarchal
basically.
control.
That's the
stayed
strong
firmly in place,
implication.
suppressed
And
the
another
women,
viewer,
suppressed
possibly
the
targeting the
competing
same
knowledge
location
Okay,
or a
that
similar
makes a
one,
grim kind of
claimed
sense
they
in terms of
witnessed
social
some kind of
But
psychic
some theories
network,
go even
something
deeper
connecting
than just
human
social
minds
or
to,
political control.
well, something
They
else,
suggest there
something
might be a
beyond our
metaphysical
world, out
dimension.
among the stars.
Metaphysical.
A psychic
How?
network.
They
connecting us
argued
to
that by
aliens.
That was
silencing
the
and
report.
demonizing
So you
women
look at
on
all
such
these
a
accounts
massive
together,
scale,
Mars,
humanity
Roswell, Wright
was, in a
Patterson's
way,
psychic
cutting
networks.
itself
It
off
paints a very
from
different
what
picture
many
than just
ancient
spying on the
traditions call the
Soviets.
feminine
Completely
principle.
different. If you,
You know,
take
this
these
idea of
reports at
cosmic
face
balance,
value,
the
even just
Shakti
partially,
in
the
Hinduism,
implication is
Sophia
huge.
in Gnosticism,
Project
the
Sunstreak
lunar force in
might have
paganism.
started as
In this
espionage,
view,
but it seems to
from
have
some of
pivoted.
the more esoteric
It became
sources,
about
the
preparing
Malleus
for
wasn't just
contact
attacking
with
women, it
non-human
was attacking a
intelligence.
fundamental aspect
Or
of reality,
maybe more cynically,
disrupting a kind
about
of
making sure that
spiritual
contact remained a
equilibrium.
secret.
A hammer
far
against
away
half
from
of
the public
humanity's
eye.
spiritual core.
But the
maybe.
theories
That's
don't even
heavy.
stop at just
It makes you
ETs
think
from
about
other
how
planets, do they?
historical
Some
events
people
like
take
this
it even
could create
further.
imbalances that
There's a
maybe
whole
still
other
resonate
branch of theory
today,
suggesting
culturally,
Sunstreak
or
wasn't
even
just encountering
spiritually.
extraterrestrials,
So
but
let's talk about the
potentially
impact.
interdimensional
game,
beings.
as
Interdimensional,
some
like
sources call
from
it,
parallel
and the
universes
climate
or
of
different planes
fear.
of existence.
Exactly,
Historians argue
something
endlessly
beyond
about
just
the exact
aliens in the
death toll
traditional
from the witch
sci-fi
hunts
sense.
the Malleus
Viewers
fueled.
reported
Tens of
experiences where they
thousands.
felt they'd
Some
slipped out of
theorists
our
claim much
reality
higher,
altogether.
even millions. Slipped out, though that's
Into
heavily
landscapes
debated.
they
But the
described
point
as
many
utterly
sources make is that
alien,
the real
surreal,
impact, the
populated
truly
by forms
insidious
of
goal,
consciousness
maybe
that
wasn't
didn't
just the
fit
body
into
count.
any
It was
human
creating
categories,
this
not just beings from other stars, but maybe
fear.
from
Yeah.
other
Entire
dimensions.
communities.
Can you
turned
give an
inward.
example? What kind of
Neighbors
things do they
accusing
describe?
neighbors.
The reports are
Children
really
testifying
strange.
against
One
parents.
described
It's
seeing this
horrifying.
massive,
And some sources
complex
argue this
geometric
was
structure
effectively a
that seemed to
blueprint,
exist,
a master
quote,
class in social
in between
control.
worlds.
Exactly.
Like a
It
hub
showed
or a gateway
terrifyingly
connecting
well
different
how
realities.
you can
Dimensional
weaponize
hub.
fear,
Okay.
fracture
Others
society,
described the
break
entities
down
themselves,
trust, and dominate
sometimes
people.
insectoid,
It almost sounds like-
sometimes almost
like early
machine-like, sometimes
propaganda
completely
tactics.
formless,
In a way,
just
yeah.
presences.
It foreshadows
and they
modern
communicated not
techniques.
with language,
You don't
but
always
maybe
need
through
armies.
direct telepathy.
Sometimes
or what
all you
viewers
need is
felt
fear,
as
suspicion,
waves of
and a
emotion.
well-defined
Not
enemy.
talking,
Escape
just
The
feeling.
Malleus
Or pure
provided the
thought
definition
transfer.
and the justification.
And
These
that shadow
beings, they
legacy
often
you're saying
felt
didn't
incredibly
end when the
ancient,
witch
like
hunts
they'd been
died
around
down.
for
Not
millennia,
according to
watching
many
Earth,
sources,
watching
no.
humanity.
Conspiracy
Some seemed
theorists argue
indifferent,
we
others
see
felt
echoes of these Malleus-style
hostile,
tactics
even
now.
predatory.
Think about how
Predatory,
certain groups are
interdimensional
sometimes
beings.
demonized today.
Yeah, that's pretty
politically,
terrifying.
It
socially.
puts a whole new
The
spin on
playbook
the
can look
idea of
disturbingly
contact, doesn't it?
familiar.
It's not just
Paint them as
meeting
a threat,
neighbors from
create
another
moral
star
panic,
system. It's
control the
potentially
information flow.
bumping
So
into
governments,
intelligences from
corporations,
entirely
using
different
similar
layers of
methods.
reality
That's the
that might
argument some
operate by
make, yes.
completely different roles.
Pointing
So
to
the conspiracy
historical
theory
examples
here
where
is
dissidents
that Sunstreak
or
found
unwanted groups were
Essentially,
smeared
yes.
using language
that
and
the project
tactics
moved
creating an
beyond
other
just
to
psychic
fear that
spying
feel
or even simple
chillingly
alien
reminiscent
contact.
of the Malleus playbook.
It became an
And
attempt
then
to
there's the other
actually map
angle,
this
how modern
interdimensional
occult groups see
landscape,
the book.
to
Right, not
figure out
just as
what other
history.
kinds of
No,
intelligence
they often view it as a
share
coded
our
text, a
reality,
grimoire,
or exist
basically
just outside our
disguised as a
perception.
condemnation.
And the reason it all got
Look for
shut down
hidden
or buried.
meanings,
According to
veiled
the
references
theory,
to things like
was because the
alchemy,
findings were just
astrology,
too disturbing,
maybe even the
too
clergy ritual
destabilizing.
magic.
So it
Discovering
lives
that
on
we
in those
share our
circles as
existence
something
with potentially
active.
powerful,
In a sense,
ancient,
yes.
and sometimes
some even weave it
hostile
into a larger
interdimensional
narrative, a bigger
entities.
conspiracy theory
That's not
spanning
something you
centuries.
just release in a press
A kind of
conference. It gets
ongoing
locked
battle,
down
maybe between
deep.
forces of
Okay,
light
so let's
and
talk about the
darkness,
end.
whether human groups or
Officially,
something
Project
more,
Sunstreak
fighting
was
over
terminated
control of
in the early
knowledge itself.
1990s.
That's the
The
official
Malleus
story,
being
yes.
just one weapon
And the
in
reason
that
given
long
was
war.
pre-planned.
It
right?
really
Something
makes
like
you think, doesn't it? How
inconsistent
these old
results and
tactics
budget
might
cuts.
still be playing out,
Pretty much
and whether ancient
standard
texts like this still
bureaucratic
hold
language for pulling the
secrets
plug
if you
on
just
something.
know how to
Happens all
read
the
between
time
the
with government
lines.
projects.
But given
So
everything
wrapping
we
this
just
up, this
talked
deep
about, a lot of
dive
people
into
don't
the
buy that
Malleus
today.
Maleficarum,
No. From
what's
a
the
critical
takeaway?
perspective,
It's clearly
many
way more than
skeptics,
just
or maybe
some,
believers in
dusty
the more exotic
misogynistic book from the
aspects,
Middle Ages.
argue
Our
that the official
sources paint it
termination
as
was
this
just
incredibly
smokescreen.
complex knot of conspiracy,
To do what?
control,
Hide the
suppression,
failures.
and maybe even
Or hide
weirdly
the successes.
preservation. To hide the
It's
successes,
deeply
or at least the
paradoxical, isn't
nature
it?
of the
It
findings.
absolutely
The
fueled
belief
centuries
is that
of
the
terror.
project didn't really
Silenced
end.
voices
it just
that
went
could have
deeper
changed
underground.
everything into black budget
And yet,
programs.
as we discussed,
even more
it
secret.
also
Exactly.
accidentally
Broken
kept
up,
alive
maybe
fragments
renamed,
of the very
absorbed
knowledge
into
it was
other
trying
classified
to obliterate.
initiatives where it could
The hammer
continue
fell,
without any
but the
public
echoes are
oversight,
definitely
without
still
awkward
here.
questions,
Which
leads
leaves
to
us
the
with a
big
pretty
question,
big question, I
why?
think.
Why
What other
the
hidden
alleged
wisdom,
cover-up?
like
And
the
the
stuff
answer,
accidentally
according
saved
to
in
the
these theories,
Malleus,
is pretty
might still be
fundamental,
out
isn't
there.
it?
It's
Buried in
reality
history's
shattering,
shadows
potentially.
waiting to be
If
found.
human minds
And
can
maybe more
genuinely do
urgently,
these
what
things,
kinds of
access
hammers,
information
new
across
ways of
space and
controlling
time,
narratives,
make
creating
contact
fear,
with
silencing
non-human
people are falling
intelligences,
today.
glimpse
This raises an
ancient
important
secrets or
question.
future events,
How do we discern
the
between
implications
genuine
are just
knowledge and
enormous,
deliberately manufactured
world-changing.
fear?
Too much power
Especially
for the
when
public
lines
to
are so
handle.
carefully
Oh,
blurred.
Or too much